reschedule them, and then I was never checked in, even though I was on my first leg, and they didn't even have me checked in for my second leg, and I was on standby for both flights, and all I can say is, praise the Lord, I'm here. So I would like to, ever since I've come to know the Lord on December 12th of 94 at 2 p.m., and it literally was at that life-changing moment that God came into my life after atheism. I had been atheist for 12 years, from 16 years old, and where I made a conscious decision that God was not real, because that whole thing came about because at 16 I had been already kicked out of high school. I was into drugs and alcohol and promiscuity and running away and sneaking out at night and bar hopping with fake IDs, and I was on the fast track to nowhere. And I at 16, when I moved out of my parents' home, my mom, they both got divorced, and my mom got remarried, and I didn't want to live with them, and my dad ended up, getting remarried, and I didn't want to live with them, and so I just moved out on my own, and I didn't talk to my parents for the next many years. And I just was in this whole world all by myself, and it was quite intimidating at first, but I had to grow up very fast. And at 16, when I find myself in my own apartment, I had to beg to get back into high school again, and the principal said, "You will never be allowed back in this school, ever." Do I make myself clear? And I didn't take that for an answer. And I continued to press the issue. I will do my best. I've changed. I want to go to college. And finally, after he could not get me out of his office until he agreed. And when he finally agreed, I said, okay, now that you've agreed to allow me back in, now I want you to agree to allow me to take 2 years of high school in one. And he just laughed, and he said, if that's what you want to do, you're never going to make it. That's just too much. I said, you watch me, and I did it, and I still graduated with my class. And that was after having moved out. And so I really cleaned up my act, and one of those things that I had to clean up too was after I had come to know the Lord, after I moved out on my own, I had to wonder, well, do I keep going to church like how we did on holidays, on Christmas, Easter, other more conveniences for children's Sunday school in the summertime? Do I still go to church or not? Is God real or not? I have to make that decision now for myself, because I'm on my own. Am I going to continue to go to church? And there was 3 things that turned me away. And one was I thought about the burning hell. Would God really, if God is real, would he literally burn people forever and ever and ever? And at my 16 years old, I thought, if I am not saved, is God going to burn me for my 16 years for eternity? That just didn't seem like justice to me, and it seemed like a monster to me. And he was worse. In my 16-year-old thinking, I thought he was worse than all the horrible dictators of the world put together and worse. That's how I saw God, if that were true. The other was because of Santa Claus, because I was lied to about Santa Claus as a child, and the joke was on me when I found out, whatever age you find out, that Santa's not real anymore. I don't know, 6, 7 years old, I don't know. And I realized when he wasn't real, joke's on me. Well, I didn't think that was too funny, and the people who told me that Santa was real are now telling me God is real, And they lied to me about Santa, and I can't see Santa, I can't hear him, I can't talk to him. All I know is I put out cookies and milk in the morning, at night, and in the morning it's gone, and presents are back in their place again. And I thought, no, I just can't buy that. And so that's strike 2. And strike 3 was, what was strike 3? Oh, I can't remember at the moment. Just left my brain. And I could not understand how God could be real. And just at that moment, I became an atheist. And for the next 12 years, I did not think about God, because to me, God was like Santa Claus. It didn't matter. So he wasn't part of my conversations. I wasn't mad at God. I mean, I'm not mad at Santa Claus. You know, Santa's just not real. He's a figment of our imaginations, and you don't be mad at Santa Claus, and so why be mad at God? You know, it was the same thing. And so I never talked about him, never talked about Christianity, never talked about anything. I mean, there was just no God. It was like there was just a nothing. You just live this life, and when you die, and that's the end. I didn't think about God for the next 12 years until my college sweetheart, who was just the dream of my life, just the best thing that ever happened to me, and we had been dating for 5.5 years. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes and no. He's like, okay, is it yes or no? And I said no for right now, but in 1 year, when I get done with nursing school, ask me again, and I'll say yes, because I did not want to be where girlfriend and boyfriend meets each other in college, and then they get married, and now wife drops out to help him through college, and she never goes back, and she ends up with children, and I did not want that to be me. I actually wanted to finish my education because I had worked so hard for it, and because it was one of the reasons that I went into the Army. And so so we dated for 4.5 years, and then in 5 years, he asked me to marry him. I said yes. 3 weeks later, we found out he had cancer. And we were slotted to get married 1 year from when he asked me to marry him. And I told him, I said, boy, honey, you know, it sure looks like you have cancer. I think you should go get checked. And he got checked, and the doctor said, oh, you just go home and tell your girlfriend that you're too young for cancer. So that was a year prior to when he asked me to marry him. A year later, then I tell him, I really think you have cancer again. I think because the doctor said, you go home and tell your girlfriend that you're too young for cancer. And I said, you know what? I can't diagnose whether you have cancer or not, but what I can tell you is that doctor's wrong. For someone who won't even check you or even take blood or anything, because the doctor did no testing at all, just said, don't worry about it. So 1 year later, he went to go get checked again. Of course, he had cancer. And then the doctor says, this is an emergency. We need to get you into surgery immediately, but you're young, and I'm sure that we've caught it early, so it'll be fine. Well, a half an hour later, or less than an hour, the doctor comes out of OR and talks to me and the family that he's had cancer throughout his whole body, and it's already stage 4, and he didn't know anything about the first diagnosis, or the lack of, and he told us that had he been checked 1 year earlier, we could have caught it at an early stage, but the way that things look inside of him right now, he's had it for a year, and there's nothing we can do. So they just sewed him back up, waited a few weeks, started doing chemo, and he actually died from the chemo. He didn't die from his cancer. He died from chemo. From that moment on, getting chemo, he just went downhill, and that was, the end. But so when we so the doctor said that there's no way that he's going to live another year. So we moved our wedding up to December 17th, which was 6 months away. And well, he was going in and out of the hospital with the chemo, with blood transfusions, with drugs and appointments all the time. And we took him to the Mayo Clinic. We were taking him down to Mexico. We were trying to get him as a research participant. We tried diet and lifestyle. We tried all these supplements. We were trying everything. Of course, we didn't know anything about diet and lifestyle. All I knew was that, you go from white rice to brown rice, and you add fruits and vegetables, so I went and bought some fruits and vegetables in a can. And that's all that I knew. I had no idea, I just thought fruit was fruit. I didn't know the special value of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. So that's basically what I knew, and as far as exercise, we'd walk around the block and call it good. We didn't know about what we know now, or what I know now. So then on December 9th, the doctor said, you've only got, he's got less than 24 hours left to live. And that was on December 9th, but our wedding was December 17th, and the doctor said he's not going to make it to the 17th. So we moved up our wedding to the next night, not knowing if he was going to make it or not. And by God's grace, he did make it. We had a beautiful sit-down wedding because he was my best friend. I wanted to marry my best friend. I did not want to be left his fiancée. I wanted to be left his wife. And I wanted the satisfaction of knowing that he was mine, my husband. And so we did get married on the 10th, and then on December 12th, he did end up on his deathbed. Now, as an ICU nurse by that time, I knew what all the monitors meant, I knew what all the fluids meant, I knew why he was getting everything, and of course I knew assessments by then, and I just looked at him, and I said, that man's got 2 minutes left to live. And so I sent all of his family and friends out of the ICU room. I sat on his bed, and I put his hand in my hands, and I put my head down, and I started to list off everything that we had done for him, the list that I just gave you. And then I remembered one story, that when Mike was getting gurneyed into the OR, his mom's best friend stopped us and said, can I tell you a story? And she proceeded to tell us her story of when she was in the ICU on her deathbed, and her doctor and her husband were talking over her supposed dead body. They thought she was dead, and they were talking about pulling the plug from a ventilator. And she was hearing the entire conversation. And she's screaming in her head, like, what do you mean? I'm not dead. I'm right here. And she's trying to move her fingers, her toes, trying to open up her eyes. She's trying to yell, scream, and she realized she's just completely helpless. Because many times when you're on a ventilator and you're close to death, they just kind of shut your body down with drugs and trying to calm everything down to reserve the most amount of energy that's remaining for if there's any potential for life anymore. And she said that, okay, God, I just give my life to you. There's nothing I can do to make myself live or die. This ventilator is making me live, and if I go off of it, I'm dead. And I can't make myself die because I'm on this ventilator that's creating this artificial life for me. So whatever, my life is now in your hands, and whatever you want for me, I give you my whole life. And she walked out of the hospital the next day. And as an atheist, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that works for you, but miracles just don't work like that. I had never seen any as a burn nurse. So I just dismissed it. But on that day, I looked at him, and I just around 2 p.m. and knew that he had 2 minutes left to live. I was going through the list, and I thought, I might as well try Jesus too. Had nothing to do with faith, It was just another thing to try in the list of things that I'd try. And so I just said, God, I put my head down and I said, God, if you're really there, you've got to show yourself to me, because I can't believe in a God that I don't know. And he came into my life as big as life, and I walked into his bathroom, and I was crying, and I walked out of the bathroom, and it was like I was just in this big bubble. And now he's sitting on the edge of the bed. This man who was just about dead, gray, ashen, could not even open up his eyelids, couldn't even have a normal conversation without talking about two totally different topics within the same sentence. And you just couldn't follow him because all the toxins, because his kidneys shut down, his liver, his bowels, everything shut down, so everything's backing up, and it's affecting his mind and his thinking, conversation. And in this clear voice, he says, honey, will you do something with me? And I said, yeah, what would you like? And he said, will you say the Lord's Prayer with me? I'm like, okay, I'm thinking in my mind, I didn't say anything, but he said, but to myself, I said, I'm an atheist, you're a non-practicing Catholic, and you want to say the Lord's Prayer? Okay. I just said, okay. I'd heard it in Sunday school growing up a few times, but I had no idea what it was. You know, we both heard a few words here and there, our Father who art in heaven. You know, I don't even think we got even to that point. And we just heard a few words, and it was pretty pathetic. It was pretty obvious we didn't know the Lord's Prayer. So he said, would you mind if I use my own words? And I said, no, not at all. Because he said, you know, it's pretty obvious we don't know it. Okay, yeah. And he just said, God, if you're real, please just give me a little bit of time with my new wife. I'm not asking for a lot of time, but I'm just asking for a little bit of time. And you know, off of that prayer, God gave us another 38 days to be together, and he walked out of the hospital the next day. From that moment I walked out of his bathroom, I just felt like I was in this big bubble of love, and I literally would have to physically look at myself. I'd have to touch my arm, touch my hand, and look at my body, because this bubble of love was bigger than me. It was physically outside of me. And it was just so filled with love, compassion, with grace, with mercy, forgiveness, with this intense amount of closeness that I couldn't explain. I'd never talked about Christianity or the reality of God before, so I had no idea what I was experiencing. All I knew was it was wonderful. And I knew that I was drawn. We drove home, and every single night God would wake him up to a scripture. In the middle of the night, God would give him a dream of scripture, and he would wake me up and say, I had just had a dream about this scripture. Will you read that to me? I was an atheist, you know, so he'd say Matthew 4:4. I don't know where Matthew is, so I'd have to look in the index. Okay, where's Matthew? Old Testament, it's not there. The New Testament, oh yeah, there it is. And okay, flip to, page 1100, and then go find chapter 4 and verse 4. Okay, 1, 2, kind of like that. And then we'd read it, and it always applied to us. It was just amazing. We felt like that this book became life. It became animation in our lives. And it convicted us. We were apologizing to each other for, after 5.5 years of a relationship. Not too many people can say that you're completely innocent. And so we apologized to each other. We even called people that we needed to apologize to. We felt these convictions that wow, of these wrongs that we've done or things that we've said. And as an atheist, you've got a lot of people to call. And so my phone was busy for a while. And it was just such a beautiful time. And in my one prayer during all that time was, God, please don't allow him to pass away while I'm gone. I don't want him to be fearful. I want to be there with him and support him through that process. And I want him to die in my arms, please. And after 38 days of being married, 40 days of 40 days of being married, and 38 days of knowing the Lord now, at 6 o'clock in the morning, he finally woke me up again with another scripture and asking me to help him to the bedside chair, and he asked for a glass of water. And I said, "Are you going to be there when I come back? Something just told me something was wrong." And he says, "My time's ready." I said, "Ready for what?" I knew exactly what he said. And he says, "It's my time to go." I just started weeping, and he said, "Can I have a glass of water?" And I said, "Are you going to be here when I come back?" And he said, "Yes." So I ran as fast as I could to the kitchen, got him a glass of water, and just as I walked in the room, he had a stroke. And I could not get him up off the chair onto the bed myself, and that night, I just happened to ask his mom to spend the night with us. And so I went to her room and I said, "Mike has had a stroke. He needs help getting back on the bed." He was 6'6", 250 pounds when he first started, but by this time he was about 180 because of all the chemo but he was just dead weight, 180 pounds of dead weight, and I couldn't handle him by myself. So she came in and helped me. He was having troubles breathing, so her and I just lifted him like it was a feather. It was like he weighed nothing, and he was still kind of dead weight, but he wasn't dead weight. It was like someone just like carried him, put him on the bed for us. And he was having troubles breathing, so I put his back up against my chest to expand his lungs, and his mom sat on the edge of the bed holding his hand, and there he passed away the way that he wanted to pass away, and that was in the arms of his two favorite women. And you know, that moment broke me. You don't get over something like that. You don't ever get over it. You just learn to move on. The Lord has given me a wonderful husband now. I praise the Lord for. But that's one of those blows in life you just never get over. But yet during that time of pain, for the next 10 years, I was in that bubble. And just this bubble of love, and it was like carrying me for 10 years because I couldn't handle life on my own. I tried one time, a month later after he passed away, and I was talking to my brother as we were going from California to Oregon, and I was sharing with him everything that had been happening to us throughout all that, and sharing God and the Bible and the nighttime readings and the convictions and the apologies, and just hours and hours and hours. And finally 2 hours before we get to our grandparents' house, I just said, I wonder if I can make this feeling go away. I wonder if I'm doing this on my own. Like, I'm just so worked up, because you know how sometimes people say that people come to the Lord out of a crutch, and I was wondering if I was using God as a crutch to get through what I knew I had to get through. And so right at that moment, I thought, I wonder if I'm doing this to myself, and am I doing this as a crutch? Just like that, the feeling went away. The bubble went away, the love, the peace, the joy. I immediately became suicidal. And here my brother is flying 80 miles an hour down the freeway, and I'm trying to jump out of the car. I'm trying to undo my seatbelt. I'm frantic, I'm crying, I'm hysterical. My brother is, with one hand he's driving with the steering wheel, with the other hand he's got his hand clutched on my seatbelt. And he's like, what happened? What happened? Tell me what happened. And I couldn't even, I was so all the pain of his death now just came upon me like a ton of bricks. It was like an elephant sitting on my chest, and I couldn't breathe anymore. All the pain now just came upon me, and I just wanted to die. I couldn't take the pain, the crushing elephant on my chest, on my lungs. I couldn't catch my breath, and my mind was just exploding with pain in my heart. And I'm frantic, and he said, and I was beating his hand to get off of my seatbelt, and he said, I'm not letting go until you tell me what happened. And I mean, that poor guy, his hand must have been so black and blue, and because I was beating his hand to get it off my seatbelt, I literally wanted to jump out. And finally, when I realized he wasn't going to let go, then I finally slumped in the seat, and I told him what happened, and as I shared. And I just slumped in the chair, and I didn't say anything, not another word for the next 2 hours until we got to my grandparents' house. Got there, hugged my grandma and grandpa. I said, would you mind, are you okay if I just go to bed? And because it was like 8 o'clock. And they said, that's fine. And I just got down on my knees, and I said, God, if this is you, then please come back. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I can't handle this. It's too much to bear. I can't take the pain. And I just cried and cried, and I didn't even stand up. I just went from a kneeling, and I just went into bed. And I just cried myself to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, first of all, with anger because I was still alive. And second of all, when I assessed myself, I realized that big bubble was back. And that love and that peace. And I realized that something was carrying me and was sharing my pain and sharing my burden. And it was the most beautiful, freeing moment again. And I got on my knees and I said, God, is that you? I said, I never want to be in this world again without you. I've been without you for all these years. I now know what it's been like with you for these weeks, and if not a month and a half. And now I've been without you again, and now you're back again. I now know what it's like. I can't take this. I don't ever want to be in this world without you again. Help me to never do that again, and never to deny you. And it was just the most sweetest 10 years ever. He knew that that's how long it took, that he had to carry me through that pain. I didn't even date during that time. I had no interest. My heart was just torn. I mean, we were in the, he had already finished school. He was in his career. I was just finishing school. We were just buying a new house together that we had already put earnest money down on. I had just bought a new car, and our whole life is before us, and all of it just got swept out. And had to return the house, and of course they let us gracefully with no problems, and it was just a time of great need. But it was also very interesting living in my brain for the first probably 6 months or so. God, in his grace and his mercy, he never took that atheistic thinking away from me. Because the moment that I walked out of that door in the bathroom, I had several thoughts that immediately came to my thought. And that was, I immediately believed that the Bible was true, even though I never believed it before. It's like instant knowledge. That was just my knowledge that I had for life. That's how embedded it was into my brain. The Bible was real. And I also knew instant knowledge that Jesus was a man who walked on this earth, and he came to die for my sins. Because I used to always wonder, why can't God be a woman? Why does he have to be a man? I was a feminist back then. And so these were just instant knowledge. They were instantly placed in my brain, and I instantly believed them as if I'd always believed them and believed no other way. But at the same time, God did not take my atheistic thinking away. because I was so entrenched in my thinking that I just couldn't see any other way. So here it was, I'm an atheist, and yet here I'm having this born again experience, which I didn't know to call it born again. I'm talking to everybody about God. I'm opening up the Bible. I'm taking the Bible wherever I go. It doesn't matter if I'm in the grocery store line or at the bank or in the post office. If there's someone behind me, they're going to be hearing about the gospel. And I'd have my Bible right there. I'd be reading in line my Bible. And people would be looking over my shoulders, hey, is that the Bible? You know, and it was like, and people were just coming to the Lord all over the place. I was telling them of what this wonderful feeling and this wonderful experience and this grace and forgiveness and this love, and other people saw it in me, and they wanted it too. And so as I'm talking about this great love of God, I mean, there's just like people all over the place who were wanting the same thing and said the sinner's prayer of repentance. And yet I did not know I was born again. I did not know I was a Christian. Yes, the third thing that was that when I became an atheist at 16 years old, I said it just left my brain, was I looked at those people around me who called themselves a Christian, and I looked at their life, and I thought, if that's what God looks like, I don't want anything to do with it. Because I would see people in their Sunday best, going to church, coming home now, and acting all prim and proper at church, and then they're going home and beating up their kids, or they're swearing, and they are yelling, and you can hear through open windows, and you know, I didn't think that was very nice. It just seemed contradictory to me. So those were the three reasons I became atheist. And so my experience of being born again was so different from what people told me Christianity was when I was a kid that I didn't recognize it. I couldn't recognize that what I was going through was actually what they were. I don't want to say what they were, because I don't know what they were. All I know is that they didn't have character traits that I would think that God would have in his people. And they were contrary to those character traits. So that's why I didn't, it was probably 6 months before I realized that I was actually a Christian, and I was not an atheist. It was interesting, the ping pong effect in my brain, thinking I'm an atheist, but talking about the Bible, and all my patients are coming to the Lord. The family of patients are coming to the Lord. My family's coming to the Lord. Friends, strangers, anyone who would listen to me. Everybody's coming to the Lord. And it was just a time of great rejoicing. And when I finally realized there was one young man that I was preaching to, and I had a little private beach ministry that I call it. I'd just go to the beach and say, okay, God, I'm just going to go find one big long log. I'm going to sit on one far end of it, and I'm going to leave the rest of the log for you to bring someone to come sit down. And whoever sits there next to me is who I know who wants to know you, and I'll know that you brought them to me. And God always brought people to me. People always sat on that log every single time without exception. And this one time, I was evangelizing with this young man about my age, and I was talking to him for like 2 hours until sunset on the beach, and then we walked to the parking lot, and we stood in front of the parked cars for another 2 hours, and just stood there and talking about God and the Bible, and then finally, after those 4 hours, he says, "Are you one of those born-again Christians?" And I remember going like this, looking up at the clouds. Yeah, I guess I am. And I finally realized that I was one of those Christians. And So now to kind of forward, that was my journey of how I came out of atheism into Christianity. How I came into Adventism was quite a story as well, how God just led me step by step by step. And in going to the Amazon was certainly part of that miracle of how that happened. Now, shortly after coming to know the Lord, he had called me to do missionary work. Well, I couldn't even hardly get out of bed in the morning and get to work, much less leave the country. I didn't even know how that was possible, but I knew he was calling me to do missionary work, and my heart was stirring, and my mind wouldn't let me go. There was no peace in my mind, and I was driving, and I finally said, fine, and I hit my steering wheel with the palm of my hand, and I said, fine, God, if you want me to be a missionary, I'll do it, but you've got to do it. I'm not doing anything to make this happen. If you want to do it, it's got to be 100% you. I'm doing nothing. And so we'll see how you work through that. But God made it happen. I mean, he made it happen again and again and again with none of my own doing, nothing of my doing. It was just like he led me in one way after another, and I started going from one country after another, and it was just amazing how that was happening. As in the burn unit, I would work 16-hour shifts. I'd work and get paid for my first 8, my next 4, because I'd do a 16 hours, from 8 to 12 hours was time and a half, and from 12 to 16 hours was double time, and I banked those hours as vacation rather than getting paid. And so I only got paid for 40 hours, though I may have worked 3 16-hour shifts that week. Well, you can imagine that my vacation time started to accumulate quite fast, so like every 2 to 3 months I was doing another mission trip, because HR would call me and say, hey, you're bumping up to your maximum hours of vacation, you either use it or lose it. Okay, I guess I better use it. All right, God, what do you want me to do? And it just always happened that I would always say, okay, God, when do you want me to take off? And from what time to what time? And he would always tell me, he and I would sit down with my calendar and we'd figure out some dates together. And I'd go get the time, I'd ask for the time off from my boss, she would approve it, and then I'd say, okay, God, now who wants me during that time? It has to be exactly that date to exactly that date. That's the only way that I'm going to know that it was actually you who's guiding me here. And every single time, without exception, he guided me on those exact dates. Again and again for the next several years. Every 2 to 3 months. And so finally, God was calling me after just, it was probably close to 2 years, just under 2 years. He started to call me to long-term missions. Again, I took between prayer and my calendar, and I sat down with God, okay, when is my date to leave? And he gave me a date. I gave my time off for my boss, and I said, okay, God, now who wants a long-term missionary for this time? And it was a miracle how I got to Brazil. God put in my heart that I've always wanted to go to the Amazon. It was my dream to go to the Amazon. I don't even know where that dream came from, because it wasn't anything that I grew up with. It wasn't anything that I knew. The dream just became a dream that I had to go to the Amazon. I just felt compelled. And one time when he actually did try to lead me to the Amazon, I ended up in Italy. That was quite a trip too. So I just said, well, God, here I am going to Italy, and now I realize you were trying to lead me to Brazil. What do you want me to do? And it was, it's our times of failure that we realize that becomes our greatest teacher. That we realize that, boy, I'm never going to do that again. And that was one of those moments. And I just said, okay, God, turn this into a mission trip, because I have no interest in looking at all these world events and cultural places. I don't care. Just use it as a foundation for sharing you. So I ended up on a bus in Italy, and I'm praying and saying, okay, God, I'm going to be walking to the Colosseum, for example, the world famous Colosseum. People save up for their entire life to go on these trips, and I don't even care, because I knew I messed up with God. I was supposed to be in Brazil, but here I find myself in Italy. And so, okay, here's another one of my self-proclaimed mission trips. Make this a mission trip, God. And so here we are, I say, okay, God, have me sit on a seat where somebody wants to know you. And I'll know whoever sits next to me will be the one that you put there, and they want to know you. Someone would always sit next to me, and I'd always, within a minute or two, turn the conversation to God, and we'd be on this wonderful conversation talking about God. When we arrive at our world-famous location, we'd all get out, we'd kind of separate, and I'd say, okay, God, who else needs to know you? Is there anybody else on this bus who needs to know you? From here until the Colosseum, for example, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or wherever we were going, Romeo and Juliet place, have someone walk next to me and introduce themselves. And someone would always walk next to me and introduce themselves. Lord, whoever you bring next to me and introduce themselves, I know that's who you want me to talk to. And that happened again and again and again without exception. I was never alone walking by myself. And then, so I'd be sharing the Lord all the way to our destination, and then we would separate, and as we're walking around, I'd be talking to more people about God, and then on walking back to the bus, okay, God, is there anyone else who needs to know you on this bus? Bring somebody to have them come introduce me, and someone to come introduce themselves, and hey, I'm, and I'd start talking about God, because I knew, what's small talk? When you know God has an appointment, there's no small talk when you've only got minutes. And let's get to the point, and let's talk about, what God sent me here for. And so it was, and this just happened place after place, day after day. Okay, God, it's mealtime. I'm going to sit down at an empty chair where there's no one sitting next to me, and now you bring someone sitting next to me at the meal table to my right, and I'll know that's who you have for me. And there would always be someone there who wanted to know God. And there was a couple of ladies from one of the South American countries, and they, I think it was Central America, maybe it was Peru, and these two sisters, they were so interested. They were Catholic, and they said, this is amazing, will you do Bible studies with us? And I said, yeah. So I went to their room for a couple of nights in a row, and we did Bible studies in the evening time. And then finally, my dad was coming over to Italy, and I asked the bus driver to let me off, and he's like, oh no, you got on with me, you're going to get off with me, at the allotted location. I said, well, my dad's going to pick me up. Oh, okay. So as he was letting me off the bus, there was a few people that I remembered that I witnessed to that I wanted to say goodbye. So I walked to the front of the bus, and I turned around to the rest of the bus, and scanning for those few people, and I was raising my hand so they wouldn't miss me, and I realized that every single hand in that bus was up. And I'd been able to witness to every single person. I stood there and in a frozen moment. And I realized that God had led me to talk to him, about him, to every single person on the bus. There was not one hand that I did not recognize, that I did not talk to. Amazing, amazing moments like that in life. And So as more and more of these opportunities came up, I'm going to skip through several of them. God was now trying to lead me now to the next step. He had to teach me that I could actually trust the Bible, that I could trust him. So here he is now. He actually did lead me to the Amazon. I was supposed to go on a long-term mission with a secular group, but I knew that God was leading me to a Christian group. And so I just felt like I was going with the wrong group, and I said, God, you've got to show me who I'm supposed to go with if I'm doing the wrong thing. And my mom, who was doing, she was a Southern Baptist pastoral student, I think it was, doing her internship at Loma Linda, which is, I lived in Redlands at that time. And so she was living with me temporarily while she was going to Loma Linda, doing her theology, finishing up her theology and doing chaplaincy and whatever else she was doing. And she says, well, I have a really good friend at Loma Linda. She's in charge of the missions. And I said, well, Mom, I'm not an Adventist. And she says, well, you've been doing missionary trips with Adventists all along. And I said, yeah, but we're unequally yoked. I go to church on Saturday. I go to church on Sunday. And I don't know why God keeps leading me to them, but he does. And, you know, I always thought that he wanted me to evangelize them. Isn't that funny? And so I went to talk to her, and I said, God, I'll know that you're leading me away from this secular agency and leading me with this group if they've got a place for me to go in Brazil on the Amazon. If there's no Amazon, forget it. It's Amazon or nothing. And I've also got to leave on this date. It's still the date that I believe that you gave me long ago, like months and months ago. And so I went to that lady and she at Loma Linda, and she says, oh, I'm really sorry. And I said, well, I don't want to make my emergency your emergency, but I really got to know because I'm supposed to be going with a secular agency, you know, in a short while. And I think it was just a few weeks, and that I was supposed to be leaving. Maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks or something. Maybe it was a month. And I said, but I really have to know, kind of like in short order. And she looked and she says, well, I'm really sorry, but there's nothing to Brazil on the Amazon. No problem. To me, door closed. You know, my fleece was Brazil or nothing, or I'm going with a secular agency. And then, but she called me after hours, and she says, Janie, good news. I think that there is a place available on the Amazon. And I said, when is it? And she says, I don't know, but why don't you call ADRA in the morning? Because it was after hours on the East Coast. I could not wait to call them in the morning. I started fasting and praying, and I said, Lord, if you're leading me, there's going to be an opportunity for Brazil on this particular date. Not the day before, not the day after, that date. And so I called ADRA the next morning, and they said, and I said again, well, I don't need to make my emergency your emergency, but I really do got to get on this. I got to know because this secular agency is waiting upon me to get going, and I'm supposed to be leaving pretty soon. So she says, well, tell you what, there is probably a place available in Brazil on the Amazon working on one of the Luzeros. And I said, wonderful. And she said, but the problem is I called the pastor who's down there, and I haven't heard from him in many, many weeks. Because what he does is he's got a little airplane, and he goes from tributary to tributary, from boat to boat to boat, because there was like 12 boats or something, and they're all spread around the Amazon. And she said, and normally he's gone for like three months at a time, and if I'm lucky, I'll hear from him like in 2 months. But all I can do is just wait until he comes back, and it's been a long time. and she said, so you're going to have to talk to him yourself. So I was still fasting and praying, and I said, God, if you're leading me, when I call him, he will pick up the phone. I have no idea if he's home or not. I have no idea if he's around on one of the tributaries on his little plane flying around. I have no idea if he's got a wife or children, an answering machine, if they pick up, or if they've got servants at the house. I have no idea what his situation is, but if they pick up the phone, I'll know you're not leading me. He has to pick up the phone, and if he's gone, I'll know you're not leading. And I called, who picked up the phone? He picked up the phone. And I also said, God, I'm going to have you use his voice to tell me whether this is what you want me to do or not. If he says no, my answer is no from you. It's not his voice, it's yours. It's not his decision, it's your decision. So you lead him to speak your words. And when I told him who I was, and he said, I'm really sorry, but we don't accept non-Adventists in long-term missions. No problems, that's God speaking, that I'm going to go to the secular agency. God's not leading me. And he says, well, let me tell you. I said, no, you don't owe me any explanation. I already prayed that God would use your voice for his answer. You said, no, that's my answer. I fully accept it, hands down. It's no problem. Well, just let me explain. And I said, fine, but you don't owe me anything. And he said, well, our people, we don't eat what we consider to be unclean foods like pigs. And I said, oh, pigs are disgusting. I gave up those as an atheist. That's just like gross. And he was like, oh. And he said, well, and bottom dwellers too of the ocean, like crab and lobster. I said, yeah, boy, I'm allergic to those. I just break out in hives, and so I haven't eaten those in years. And he was like, oh. And he said, well, and our women generally just dress more modest than women of the world. And I said, boy, I'll tell you, I know. God's already dealt with me with my dress too, a lot. And I used to dress like that too. And he said, oh, well, and our people don't smoke. And I said, oh, I've never got into smoking before. And he said, oh. And he said, and our people don't, generally drink coffee or alcohol. And I said, oh, coffee is disgusting. I can't even stand the smell of it. I've never drank it in my life. And never even tasted it. I can't even stand the smell. I can't get past the smell to even have a drink of it. It's just so gross. And I don't drink alcohol. I've given that up now since I've become a Christian. And he said, oh, and he just kind of kept on going with this line, and I kept telling him, yeah, God's already been dealing with me on these things. And he says, you know what, why don't you come? And I said, oh no, you already said no. That's the voice of God to me. And he's like, no, really, I'm serious. I'm inviting you. And I said, now I don't know what to do. Because you first said no, and I asked God to use your voice, and now you're saying yes. And I said, well, I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about it, to uninvite me. And I'm going to call you again tomorrow. So we hung up, and before I called again, I said, okay, God, if you're leading me here, because it sure looks like you are, then he will pick up the phone again. Not somebody else. He's not going to be out doing yard work or picking mangoes. He will pick up the phone. I called again at a random hour in the afternoon. He picked up the phone. And so I said, did you give it any thought? And he said, give what thought? I said, well, about uninviting me. He said, no, I invited you. Therefore, my offer stood. And I said, wow. So I said, and he said, well, I said, so what's my next step then? And he said, well, I have a group from Loma Linda coming down in just several weeks, which was like 3 or 4 weeks away. And that's when I was supposed to be leaving myself. So I'm like piqued in my interest again. And I'm thinking, well, maybe God is leading me to Brazil again after my failure of going to Italy instead. And I said, so what day are they leaving? He said, I don't know, but here's the name at the person at Loma Linda who's organizing the trip. They're a Student International Mission Services group. They're coming down for 2 weeks. So I take the name from him, I hang up, I'm still fasting and praying, and I said, okay, God, my next fleece is when I talk to this man from Loma Linda, the date that they are leaving must be the date I'm leaving. If it's a day before, day after, or any other day, I'll know you're not leading. I call him, and he says, and I talked to him about the trip that he has, and he has a group leaving on the day I'm leaving. And I'm just like, because I wanted to make sure after my failure of not going to Brazil the first time, I said, Lord, I failed. I don't deserve to go to Brazil. If I've lost that blessing and that opportunity, I accept that consequence because I didn't follow through. I accept it. But if you, in your mercy, if you would allow it again, give me another opportunity, I'd be so appreciative. That's why I'm being so careful now, because I want to make sure that he's leading and not me. And so I have to lay all of these fleeces to make sure he's leading, and I'm not making this happen myself. So he gives me the flight information, and I said, okay, God, I'm going to call the airlines right now, and I need to be on that flight. Not arrive in Brazil at the same time. I need to be on that flight on that day with the group. And if they don't have a seat left for me, I'll know you're not leading. If they have a seat for me, then I'll know you're leading. I called the airline lady, my travel agent that I used to call all the time, which she knew me by now, and she looked and she says, oh, I'm really sorry, Janie, but there's that whole plane is full. There's nothing left. No problems. God's not leading. And so I just explained to her. I said, oh, I'm really, and she says, well, what about going to another place? I said, no, it's either Brazil or no place. And so I started talking to her about all these fleeces. I started sharing the gospel with her and God and how he's been leading. And for like the next 5 or 10 minutes, we're just kind of talking back and forth. And I did not realize that she was continuing to look on for the flight. And about 10 minutes later, she says, Janie, good news. Someone just canceled and there's one seat available on that flight. And I said, take it. And so there I was, heading down to Brazil with a group, from Loma Linda, a bunch of students. And this was the Luzero that we were on. And this was the group that I was with, and it was an amazing 2 weeks, so I learned some jungle nursing for the next 2 weeks, and these are just some of the places that we went to. And then when it was time for me to go, so I was to get 2 weeks of jungle nursing training. And then the pastor would give me then my assignment. And what I'd heard during that 2 weeks is that you do not want to go to the furthest west of the Amazon to Beijing. You do not want to go there. It's very dangerous. They've got drug lords. They've got pirates that jump ship. They steal your passport. They rape the women. If you're lucky, you're only kidnapped and you're not slaughtered. The pastor, they always run out of supplies by the time they get to the furthest west of the Amazon, and And so you don't want to go there because you have to improvise a lot. Well, improvising, I was an ICU nurse, so I knew my stuff and I was quite confident, but to improvise, I was used to technology and I wasn't used to, 2x4s really. And, very simple kind of jungle nursing. So I went back to the pastor. Oh, and then there's no white people there. I was told that there was no one who looked like me. Everybody's Brazilian or from Peru or Colombia. There's no white people, I was told. There's no one who speaks English. Everybody speaks Portuguese. No English there. I did not know Portuguese. So, during those 2 weeks, I was terrified of going to the furthest west of the Amazon. I go to the pastor and I say, okay, I'm ready. And I said, where's my assignment? And he says, Beijing, the furthest west of the Amazon. I think my jaw hit the floor in horror, and I don't even think I said anything to the pastor. In my terror, I just turned around and I hightailed it back to my bedroom in the other mission house. And I got down on my knees and I started to tell God off. And I said, God, I told you I did not want to go to the furthest west of the Amazon. I am so scared. I don't know Portuguese. They don't know English. No one's going to know me. And if I die out there, they're going to steal my passport, and all the drug lords, that are out there with their cocaine fields. And, no one's even going to find me again, if I get kidnapped. And I'm just complain. And finally, after I really had nothing left to say, I'm like, God, don't you have anything to say? And it was just silence. And after I finally had nothing more to say, he said, my grace is sufficient for you. I will help you through. And I said, okay, God, if I'm going to go there, but you now have to be my translator. You have to teach me the language. You have to teach me jungle nursing. You've got to be my doctor. You've got to be my translator. You've got to be my protector. You've got to be like everything to me. And I'm naming off all these things that God has to do for me. And so I went back to the pastor and I said, okay, I will go. So here I am now on the plane. The pastor was going to put me on this little boat, like one of the boats that I showed you, or a makeshift of it. They're river taxis, but it was a 4-day journey to Beijing, and we in English would call it Benjamin, but they pronounce it Beijing, and so it's. So he ends up putting me on a plane, which would get me there in just, short order, like a half an hour, 45, I think it was a 45-minute flight. Well, shortly after takeoff, we have engine problems and we have to make an emergency landing. We made an emergency landing and we were there then for the next 8 hours stranded. And we were at an airport, but we had no communication with anybody. No one knew where I was. Here I am out in the middle of the Amazon, broken down with this little plane, and no one knows where I am. I have no idea where I am either. I have no idea about anything. All I know is I have me and God. And so I sat at one of the tables, and on the runway, actually, they actually have these tables that you can sit at and eat your lunch on the runway. Nothing like you see today. And so I sat at one of those tables and opened up my Bible and I just said, God, there's got to be somebody that was on my plane that wants to know you. Bring somebody to me. Because there were like, this actually ended up being everybody on the plane. And so we were stranded together for those 8 hours. And so this lady sitting to my left with the dress on, she was the first one who came up to me, and her and I, she didn't know English, I didn't know Portuguese, but I had an English-Portuguese dictionary that we were just having a hoot with. So we're just kind of, talking back and forth, and why are you here? And, so there's my crash course, in talking Portuguese. And so then, to my right, scooting down, I don't have a pointer with me, but kind of squatting down is her adult son. And when he saw that her and I, his mom, were having so much fun, he came and joined us, and now there's 3 of us. And eventually, one by one, within an hour, everybody's at my table now. And we're all sharing lunch, and we're all kind of going back and forth, passing my dictionary around, trying to communicate with each other. Had the best time ever. Now, so here we are now in Beijaming. We actually finally make it safely. And we're praising God, that we made it safely. And there's no one there to pick me up because no one knew where I was, no one knew when I was going to show up, no one knew anything about anything. So there I am in the airport all by myself, late at night, it's dark, and you can see it's dark outside. And so we took pictures and we parted, but that's not going to be the last that you're going to hear of this. So this was the actual boat that I was on. It was a Lucero 15, and you can see in the back there, it's kind of faded out, but there's a tarp over that eventually that we take off, and that whole back end is open, and you sleep in a hammock. And so it was, here's a couple of kids. Kids are given a knife, this kind of a knife. I think it's on their 6th birthday. 6 years old, they're given that kind of a knife. And the boys are given, on the next birthday, they're given a handmade dugout canoe at 7 years old. And in 7 years old, they take their little mini canoe that the men in the village all dug out for him by hand, and he goes out with his knife, and his however he's going to fish, and now he brings home fish. He brings home dinner at 7 years old. It's just amazing. I mean, look at this little kid. He's got this axe here. And, here's one of their little tiny boats. And so we ended up, so here I am now on the boat. And on day 3, all along, we're going to the tributaries. And I am going to, so as we stop to do medical missionary work, because I'm the medical person, I'm the only medical person, and I have a translator who was another young lady my age, and she knew very limited English. And here I am trying to tell her what I want to know from my patient, and I'm thinking, my patient, someone's going to get killed here, because I'm not going to know what she's saying to me, and she doesn't know what I'm really saying to her, and someone's really going to get hurt here. And on the end of day 3, I just knelt down to my hammock and I just said, God, this isn't working for me. I have to know the language. You have to teach it to me very, very quickly, because I need a relationship with my own patients and not through a third party. And I continued to pray whatever I was praying, and then I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning and I could speak Portuguese. Anything dealing with the Bible and anything dealing with medicine. Regular conversation, I had not a clue what people were saying. It was just Greek. But when it came to the Bible and my patients, I knew exactly what they were saying to me. And I did not know what the gift of tongues was at that time, It was months later after I came home from Brazil before I ever realized what the gift of tongues was. And it was, and so there I was able to then speak in Portuguese, and God then helped me very quickly to learn the rest of the language in my day-to-day conversations. It became such a language to me, became my first language. I started to dream in Portuguese. I was giving Bible studies in Portuguese. I was reading a Portuguese Bible, and it became my first language. And I realized that I was losing my own language. And I just said, God, I have to speak English. I am so homesick. This is in one of my prayers. I said, God, you've got to help me. I want to go home. Just let me go home and then come back. And I just have to speak English. I have to have something grounding me here. That I feel like I'm losing it. I can't even think in English anymore. And that morning, Zaina and myself, the other young lady missionary, the translator, who was no longer really my translator anymore, but her and I, the pastor had already gone. They were doing evangelistic meetings, not me, because I didn't know what Adventists believed. Remember, I'm not an Adventist. I had no idea what Adventists believe, and there was family of mine that told me that if I became an Adventist that they would disown me. So I would not study with Adventists as I was there. But on that first day, I asked the other young lady missionary, I said, we're going to be together for a long time here. I go to church on Sunday, you go to church on Saturday. Why do you go to church on Saturday? She opened up the Bible to the 4th commandment. I read it, and I literally slammed the Bible closed, and I did not want to read it again because my family was on the line. Keep in mind that at 16 years old, I was in this world all by myself, and I did not want to go back to that time again. I knew what it was like to lose my family that I was very close with. And so here I am finding myself in that another situation where I'm going to be in this world all by myself again, and I do not want to do that. So I am being extra cautious. I don't want to know what they believe. I don't want to hear it. And when they were doing their meetings, I didn't even listen because I didn't care. But I was studying with God myself. And so I had read a book very early on, just within the first week or so of being there, and the gist of the book was that Christianity is so far from the truth of God that you can't even recognize it anymore. And I thought, wow, I wonder if my church taught me anything wrong. So I asked God, did my church teach me anything wrong? The first thing he tried to teach me was a Sabbath. I literally closed my Bible, and I literally held out my arm, and I said, no, God, I'm not willing. I'm not willing to go there. And then I was kind of smug. And then I said, Lord, is there anything else my church taught me wrong? And I'd always thought that my husband was in heaven watching me. And so I was living my life as if he was watching me. And I took the world's fastest showers. Probably within 1 minute, I was undressed, showered, and back into my clothes again, because that's how self-conscious I was, that everybody, all who's ever lived in their life on this world was watching me shower. And then I was just set free when I found out that he was actually sleeping and everybody else is too. I started to enjoy my showers again. And then it was just one truth after another. I started learning about the second coming. I started learning about the trio Godhead. I started to learn about the millennium, including the millennium of the earth. I started to learn about the 2300-day prophecy. I started learning all of our beliefs. I learned the 2300-day prophecy from my Sunday pastor, by the way. And that was one of his very last sermons before I left for Brazil. And I thought, wow, this looks really interesting. I think I'm going to study it while I'm in Brazil. So I studied it out, and amazingly, it was my NIV. It wasn't even a King James Bible. I learned all of our beliefs through the NIV. And I know that there are so many people out there, it's got to be the King James and the King James only, and I just can't, I can't relate. Because I found all of our beliefs right there in the New International Version. So he ended up just teaching me truth after truth after truth, and it was a time of great learning as well for me. And the people I was with obviously saw me, because sometimes it would take 2 days to get to the next tributary. And that's all I would do for like 8 hours a day. That's all I would do is just be in my Bible. It was just me and my Bible and God and my electronic Bible. That's all I had. I had an electronic Bible, my physical Bible, and prayer. And that was it. So here we are now ending up, so Zina and I, we were heading off now to the evangelistic meeting for that morning. And when we are coming back at night after the evangelistic meeting, we're just walking back, and because remember my prayer that morning, I need to go home. I'm homesick. I have to speak English because I'm losing it. I can't even think in English anymore. I'm thinking everything in Portuguese. We're walking back, and this young man about our age stops us. He's in a fenced yard with a house, and he says, "Hey, what are you girls doing?" And we kind of talk to him, but we're on the outside of the fence, and he says, "Hey, I have a party going on. Do you want to come in?" Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Two couple of young girls, going into a strange house. Oh, yeah, sure, sign us up. Well, he obviously saw our discomfort, because we said no, obviously. And he said, "Well, would you feel more comfortable if we brought everybody else out and we sat outside in chairs?" We looked at each other. Yeah, we'd be okay with that. So everybody brought chairs out. We did not go into the house. And everybody brought chairs out. And we're all talking Portuguese. And not the person next to me, but the person next to that person was a beautiful black young lady. Because everybody there is Brazilian. And I heard a very familiar language come out of her mouth of the most unlikely people. And she spoke English to me. And I whipped my head around. I said, "You know English?" And she says, yes, she was from South Africa, where she had learned English and grew up with English. And I was just praising God. We talked and talked and talked for the next several hours in English, so I could kind of get grounded again. My heart was full, and when we finally left that group of people, went to my hammock and kneeled down at night, and I just said, "Wow, God, that was so amazing." And then he brought back to me my prayer that morning, that I was homesick and I wanted to go home because I wanted to speak English. And I was told that there was no one who spoke English out there. And so another day, I'm watching these Adventists now. Who are these people? I notice they're kind, they're gentle. They're not. I notice that they're not like my people, the Sunday keepers, who are they're gossiping and putting up posters about these other people who might be teaching you something different than what you know from the Bible, talking about Adventists, of course. And so there's posters about us, and the Sunday pastors and Sunday people don't know that I'm one of them. And so they start persecuting me too. And I was watching the Adventists, and I noticed that they always replied with prayer and humbleness, protection in God. There was one time when, because remember, God never, I had to learn common everyday language. And so there would be people out there saying profanities to us, and I had no idea what they were saying. So I'm just all happy and just walking down the street, not a care in the world. I have no idea what they're saying. And they're all mad and, wanting me to be mad and to say something back. And I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" And but they had no idea I was one of them. And I noticed that. I thought, how is it that you are persecuting us when you don't even know us? You don't even know who I am, and I'm one of you. That's what I'm thinking in my head. I saw the dichotomy there, and I thought, you guys don't even know what you're persecuting, because you're persecuting your own person. And so Zina and I and the pastor had taken his motorcycle already to the place of worship, and the boat captain and Zina and I were walking, and then with somebody else. So the four of us were walking, and we were almost to the place of worship, and we saw the pastor on his motorcycle surrounded by young men, and they were enclosing on him, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to get hurt badly. And they were not kindly. You could tell by their body movements, and you see someone going like this. There was no nice movements. And so we looked at, I'd been in the Army. I don't watch somebody get beat up in front of me. You're taught, you do what you got to do to help your people. And so I'm not going to let this, the pastor get beat up. And so I say to the other ones, we got to go help him. So we all go, and as soon as the four of us show up, they start to disperse, because now they realize the pastor isn't alone anymore. And then I saw the pastor and all of us go into this place of worship, and we prayed for these men. I'm like, this is amazing. These people are amazing. They pray about everything. And then there was another time when I'm doing nursing on the boat, and I am listening to people. I'm listening kind of to the pastor with one ear, and I'm listening to my patient with another, and in between my patients, and I hear somebody else come on the boat, a man, and I hear the pastor, oh, well, why don't you come on and have lunch with us? And I'm thinking, wait a minute, now we only prepare lunch for four of us. It's the pastor, it's Zina, me, and the boat captain. There's not enough for five. We didn't make enough for five. But I thought, okay, so we'll just all have a little bit less. Well, somebody else comes on the boat, and the pastor invites him for lunch. And then a couple more, and he invites them for lunch. And I'm like, this isn't happening. And then more people come on, and he invited like 10 more people to come on, and we had enough for four. And so now we got like 14 people eating one little tiny fish, like literally that big. You know how big a piranha is? That's what it was, one piranha for four of us. And one little tiny bowl of rice and a tiny bowl of beans, like enough to where you can't get fat here. There's not enough food. You're lucky to get satisfied. And so there's enough for four of us to barely get satisfied, and now we've got 10 extra people. The pastor starts to pray over the food, and he says, God, please multiply this food. We've got little food, but we've got lots of people. People are hungry, but everybody needs to eat. Would you bless it? And then he finished his prayer. And I just kind of went off to the background to hide. And I just said, and so I'm talking to God in my head, and I said, Lord, I'm just going to let them eat. And I was the same size now as I was then. And I said, Lord, I have more to lose than they do. They have less like fat than I do. And so I'm just going to give it to them and to let them divide it. And I'll eat tomorrow. So no worries. And so I'm just kind of talking to people and hanging out and like I'm not hungry, even though my stomach's growling. And I started noticing that the line was gone, and I'm looking at everybody, and I noticed that everybody's plate is full. And Zina and me are the ones who made lunch. So I know how much lunch there was. And I look at everybody, I'm literally looking at everybody's plate, and there was like 13 of them, and plus me, it was probably 14 people, and they all have food. So I start to go talk to the people that are closer to the table. I'm like, I've got to see what's going on here, because I'm sure everything's gone. And I said, Lord, it's totally fine if everything's gone. I'll just eat tomorrow. And I went over there, started chit-chatting, and I remember I just wanted to kind of nonchalantly look out of my peripheral vision, to see what was there on the table. And in my peripheral vision, I saw a fish, a bowl of rice, and a bowl of beans. And I did a double take, and I looked at that food, and there was like one little tiny piece missing out of that little fish, like that big. And the beans were completely untouched. And the rice was untouched. There was no, how you see when the beans are done, and then, you can see where the fill line was. It had not moved. And I am now looking at people's plates. I'm like scratching my head. I don't know what's going on here. And I said, wow, Lord, there's like enough for me. And so I take a little bit because, there's 14 people with also a little bit, and I take less than they did. But they all had like plates of food that you could actually be satisfied with. And they actually when I got my plate, I noticed that people started getting seconds. I'm like, how is this happening? And then I went and got seconds. And then I noticed that people were starting to put their plates away and that they were done, and there was still food left, and people continued to come, and I finally got to my full. I ended up having 3 servings because I took so little. And I was full, and I noticed that when everybody had their hands empty of their plate, I looked in the dishes and everything was gone. What do we have to worry about in the end times? If God has to feed us by Jezebel's table, he's going to feed us by a miracle. If there's one little tiny wild blueberry patch, there's going to be enough to fill us. We don't have to worry when we have to go on the run. He is quite able to supply all of our needs. And because of that situation and that experience, I have multiple times over the years have prayed over potluck food when I knew we didn't have enough. And God has always supplied every single time. And it's happened so many times that I now start bringing other people to prayer with me, so I'm not the only one who knows what's happening. And we pray so it not only increases my faith, but it increases theirs. And it happens every single time. So because of, I'm just going to kind of go through some of these pictures, and then I'm going to get to my final story here. These are just, people are very creative in self-employment. They don't have a lot of social services like we do in Canada and the U.S. So people have to be self-employed, and they have to make an income. And if they don't figure out how to make an income, then they don't eat. And so people will just sell things like this on the street. This is how she makes her living. Other people may sell just a few pairs of shoes. Some people may cook a few things on a grill. So these were some of the beautiful pictures. This is me in my hammock. I absolutely loved it. This was one of the evangelistic meetings, and another, lots of baptisms, such a lovely group of people. So that's to my right, that the shirt says Amazon, that's Zina, so she was my translator. The one to my left, that's the pastor's wife, and then to her left, that's the wife of the captain and their kid. And that is quite a common fish that we used to eat down there. And every night I would, after I got done from the clinic, I would always take my bath in the Amazon. I'd jump in the Amazon, get all wet, put my shampoo, and I'd have in my swimsuit, and I'd lather up, and I've got really ticklish feet. So I'd be dangling my feet in the water, and all these fish would be coming up and like nibbling on my feet. And I'd be laughing, and I'm there on the back of the boat all by myself. And people must have thought I was absolute nuts. But I was just having so much fun with these fish, and they were just having fun with me. And that happened every night. And then sometimes there were times when I didn't get done with my patient care until after dark. And then I'd have to crouch down and shine the flashlight along the water, skimming along the top. If the eyes were this close, I would get in. But if they were that far apart, I would not get in. That's an adult alligator. With the little babies, I would get in, no worries. And then one time now I did not know at this time that what fish were in the Amazon. And so this one time I happened to ask very late in my trip, it was like 4 months into my trip, I said, what kind of fish is it, by the way, that we keep eating? And they said it was piranha. I said, there's piranhas in the Amazon? And it terrified me for about a split second, and I thought, you know what, if God has protected me all these months, all these days that I've been swimming in the Amazon, then piranhas must not be as bad as people say they are, or I'm being protected. It's got to be one of the two. So I didn't worry about it. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to worry about it anymore. And I just, every time I'd swim, and then I said, and I would notice that whenever we would throw any of our leftover food, because we had no fridge, any of our leftover food like fish bones or anything over the side, or any extra beans, if there was, which most of the time there wasn't, but it was just like skins of fruits and vegetables or something, and those would all go into the water, and there would just immediately like that, there would be like 100 fish that would just come gobble it up in seconds, all that food was gone. And I did not realize those were all piranhas. And when I looked at those fish that were tickling me on the bottom of my fish, on my feet, those were all piranhas. And I realized that I had been protected. So this is, I don't know, this may be a piranha. I'd have to ask again. This was one of my patients. This was a hospital that I visited. This was one of my patients that came to me who had a snake bite. These are precious children. Oh, the children there were just so gorgeous and beautiful. They're like little monkeys. Monkeys always pulling out lice or something from each other. That's what they're doing here. 4 to a motorcycle was quite common. Good thing nobody's overweight. But this was, motorcycles are used very differently in many of these other countries. Here's someone just selling gasoline on the side to make some money. Funny enough that people have satellites. They'll have their cable TV before they have a car or a nice house or any kind of, they have a TV. That seems to be priority to them. Drying. This was a wild monkey that actually jumped in my arms. So we're at a zoo here, and I'm looking at the encaged monkeys, and there was a wild monkey on top of the cage of the trapped monkeys, and this one, right off its cage, just jumped right in my arms, and I froze. I didn't even know what to do with my hands. I didn't know to touch it. I didn't know to pet it. I just thought, I don't know, I'm just going to kind of let it do what it's going to do, but I just thought that was so neat. And then, of course, it had to look through my hair, too. And this little guy, he had a 7-Up tin, and he actually So here he is. He turned on the water. He went and got himself a 7-Up can that was empty. He filled it up, and now he's drinking from it. He did all that by himself. Amazing little guys over there. Those little circles that you see, those are Brazil nuts growing. And so this is the man. That was my first time ever seeing Brazil nuts, so I went to the door and I introduced myself and asked if I could actually have a Brazil nut, so that he handed me the Brazil. He actually climbed the tree for me and got me a Brazil nut. And then this is cacao or chocolate. And cashews. You ever see raw cashews? So those are cashew, and that's the cashew fruit right there. So 1 cashew to 1 fruit. Those are very poisonous, by the way. So there's yellow and red cashews as well. You see 1 cashew on that. Those cashews are very poisonous if they're eaten raw or touched by a human. So they have to be baked, and they have to be handled in a very certain way to make them edible for us. But there's one growing. And mangoes and jackfruit. Those are some gourds. Mangoes galore. Coconuts, papaya. I don't know what these are, some kind of plums. And I believe that these are a type of carob. I believe that's a type of carob. And starfruit, that's a starfruit tree. They're quite big. And that's the final river taxi. So here I am. I'm heading back now. I've been there for 5 months, and I'm now heading back, and it's a 4-day trip. And I said, God, I'm going to be spending 4 days on this taxi. I know that there's got to be someone, at least one person on this taxi who needs to know you. And so I'm going to sit down on a bench, and I'm going to open up my Bible, and you have someone come sit next to me. I'm already used to that with God. And I say, bring him to me, and I'll know that's who you want me to share with. This young man came, sat down next to me, and he says, is that a Bible? And I said, yes. He's talking to me in Portuguese. And he said, will you study it with me? I mean, that was like right off the bat. And I said, yes, what would you like to study? He gave me his topic, and we studied right then and there. I knew my Bible so well at that time, I knew it front to back. And I could, any topic, any Bible study, just no notes or anything. It was just all in my head. That's how much I was in the Bible. And so we started studying, and we studied for like an hour or something. And then I gave him homework, and I said, when you're done studying, here's your homework, and when you are done, then whenever it is, whether it's 1 hour or whether it's the next day or not at all, it's up to you. You come back to me whenever you're ready for the next study. And so he left, and I said, okay, God, is there anybody else on this boat who needs to know you? And another man comes and sits down to me. He says the same thing. Is that the Holy Bible? I said, yes. And he said, will you study it with me? I just heard this. Yes, I will. He chose a topic, and we started to study. I gave him homework. Whenever you come back is up to you, whether it's 1 hour or not at all, or tomorrow, whenever it is. I'll be here. Just seek me out. He left. Lord, is there anybody else who needs to know you? A third man came and sat next to me. We started studying the same thing. And about an hour later, after I was done with him, one of the first guys comes back to me again, and he's all done with his homework already. So we study again and again. And the second guy comes back, and I believe it was a third guy who never came back again. But the first 2 guys, we continued our studies back to back. And then one of the guys, he said, you speak really good Spanish. I said, I don't know Spanish. I know Portuguese. He says, no, you're speaking perfect Spanish. He says, I don't know Portuguese. I only know Spanish. And I said, no, you're speaking perfect Portuguese. So he was speaking Spanish, and I was hearing him in Portuguese. I was speaking Portuguese. He was hearing me in Spanish. See, the gift of tongues is for the edification of the church. It's for the people that we are trying to reach. It's never for the person God uses. But I didn't know what the gift of tongues was. He looked at me kind of strange. I looked at him kind of strange, like, we don't understand what's going on here, but okay. And we just started studying again, and on we went. And then on the very last day, the last hour, we continued our studies on a rolling basis several times over the next 4 days. And he says, Janie, I have something to tell you. Can we talk alone? And I said, yes. What is it? He said, I want you to know that there could be authorities at the port when we land and when we dock. And I want you to just sit here. Have your passport ready. The people on the boat will see that I've been with you. So they're going to think that you and I are together somehow. And so you just need to answer their questions truthfully, whatever it is. They're probably going to ask questions about me. And I said, okay, like, what's going on? And he says, I'm here in the country illegally. I'm Mexican, and I've come here to get a job to provide for my family, to send money back to them. And they're after me now. And so they may have caught up with me, and they may be at the port. And so you might be in some danger, you might be questioned, but just answer the questions. He walked me through the whole thing. We docked, and sure enough, the authorities, with a whole bunch of them, there must have been 20 SWAT team guys, all with their machine guns, and he, as soon as we docked, he just peacefully got up, and he just gave himself up. And we were all told to stay on the boat, and I was told to stay right where I was. He told me to stay where I was, so the authorities could find me. And but the amazing thing is they never did question me. They just took him off. So here I am. I've got my arm. I'm sitting on the bench, and I've got my arm over the side of the boat there, and as you can see, and I'm watching them put him in handcuffs, taking him off peacefully, and he turns around and looks at me. And God told me, he's mine. That wasn't the end of him. It was about 10 years later, I received a letter from him in the mail. I have no idea how he found me. And his letter said that he had spent the next 10 years in prison, and he praised God for it, and because God gave him a prison ministry, and he was able to lead so many people to the Lord in his prison ministry. So this is what it looks like with all your hammocks on the river taxi. And then my final story, you remember these people? These were the people from the broken down plane. Remember? So there's the woman to my right. Her son isn't there in this picture. And then those are her adult children there. And the baby belongs to that mother now, but those are her 3 girls, and you met the son. So we get off the boat, and I'm getting ready to leave Brazil, and I'm just walking by myself. I'm off the boat. I'm walking to the pastor's house, and there's this big long street, and all of a sudden I hear my name, Janie, Janie. And I was like, who knows me here? I'm like out in the middle of the Amazon, who knows me? And I'm looking at the woman who's running towards me. Obviously, I'm probably pretty easy to pick up in the middle of the Amazon. But I was quite tan by that time, as you can see. And I started putting my hair back, and like everybody, like all the other ladies did, and I looked so much like a Brazilian that people just spoke Portuguese to me. They had no idea, that I was American. And in my family at the airport, when they came to pick me up, all of them walked right past me. I'm like, hey, I'm smiling, and they all walk right past me. And I turned around and I said, hey, and I said, hey guys, and they turned around and they're like, Janie? That's how much I had changed, how tan I got. But anyway, back to this family. So she comes up to me and she said, Janie, is that you? And I said, yes, this is me. And she says, I'm the one that got broken on the airplane with you when we broke down. And I said, yes. And she says, oh, how long are you in town for? And we're talking Portuguese now. You know Portuguese. I said, yes. And so she said, you have to come to my house tonight and have dinner with me. Will you do a Bible study with my children? And I said, yes. And so here I am. I went every night for several nights in a row to do Bible studies. And by the end of, I don't remember how many days it was anymore, maybe 4 or 5 nights, that I went to their homes and the entire family was baptized. And by that time, I'd already learned all the 27, 28 fundamental beliefs on my own through my NIV, no studying with Adventists. Me, my Bible, my electronic Bible, and prayer. That was all I had. And I went to the pastor. I had no idea what Adventists believed. I had no idea. And so I went to the pastor. And I said, Pastor, you will never believe what I've been learning in my Bible. Did you know about the Sabbath? It's Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. Did you know that when people die that they are not in heaven, but they're sleeping? And I was talking about the millennium, the second coming, and all of our wonderful beliefs. And he's like this in the doorway. He's just smirking at me. And I said, so I got done with my little speech to him of all this stuff that I just learned. And I said, why are you smiling like that? And he said, welcome to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I said, you mean this is what the Seventh-day Adventists believe? And he said, yes. And because my point was, now that I've learned all this stuff, now I need to go home and find a group of people who found what I found of truth in the Bible. And I had no idea I was with them the whole time. But, this was just a wonderful group of people. Back then, you could wave goodbye, actually, right there from the airport. So this was what the inside of the boat looked like. And it was these 2 men on the left that are looking at the camera. Those are 2 that I evangelized. And I believe it was this first one then that ended up in prison with the prison ministry. And you can see me and Zina, but I got to know all these people, and I got to talk about the Lord to all sorts of people. But anyway, that's my Brazil journey. That's my journey from atheism to Christianity, being born again. It's my journey. I've got many other stories, many of them very hair-raising journeys that God has put me through, and I just thank Him for every single one of them. I've been to 40 countries now, and God is still in the business of miracles. He still wants to do them. The reason we don't see them is because our own lack of faith, our own lack of prayers, our own lack of asking what we want, and our lack of really stepping out and saying, God, this is what I want. I need to learn the language. I want to share you. Whatever your issue is, I want to, I'm laying this fleece before you. And see, true faith says that it doesn't matter how God answers. I just want Him to answer, even if it's not favorable to me. He's answered my prayer. So any comments or questions? Yes, I was baptized on January 23rd of 1999. Yeah. So after I came back from Brazil, my sister, who was a born-again Christian because of my transformation, her landlord was an Adventist. And so she got me in touch with them, but they wanted me to be baptized in Brazil, but I would not, because when I read the baptismal certificate, who's this Ellen White lady? You know, I'm not going to get baptized into a lady. I want to get baptized into Christ. And I need to find out who this lady is. So I talked to the Adventist couple about who this lady was, and they told me that, you know, we're not being, but that is no longer part of North American baptismal certificates anymore. They told me she was, and then I just promptly forgot about her. And then I started to share all of these wonderful Bible truths with my family back home, and sure enough, those who said that they would disown me did. And I said, God, you got to get me out of here. I'm just making more of a mess. They don't want to hear the truth. They're stuck in their ways. Get me out of here. And then that's when he took me for the next 9 months to Nepal and India, where I've got wonderful stories of God in his workings there. How I had to flee Nepal to get into India with my American dog, laying our life on the line, and I mean, being sought after by the government officials and hair-raising. But, you know, God is faithful. We don't have to worry about anything when we have to run for our life. Nothing. It doesn't matter if someone's got a rifle right to our head. If he wants that rifle to turn like butter, it will. If he wants it to backfire, it will. And if for some reason there is a benefit to our death, that will happen as well. We don't need to worry, because we aren't here on this earth to live the longest. We are here to honor God, and when our physical life ends is up to God, not up to me. So it's as he calls. It's death before dishonor should be the motto of every Christian. So when I came back from, while I was in Nepal, there was a bookshelf. And so they asked me to start up a clinic, and that on that bookshelf, I just picked up a book. I had no idea I didn't even look at the author. It was called The Greatest Sermon Ever Preached. And I read that book, and wow, did that book convict me. It laid the foundation for a really strong Christian faith. And then I picked up another book, had no idea who the author was, never even looked. And it was Steps to Christ. And wow, did that lay another foundation. And then I read Christ Object Lessons, which laid another foundation. And then I read Desire of Ages, all right there in Nepal. And those 4 books laid the foundation for my faith. And once I came home, then I realized, that's who I was reading. So God blinded my eyes of who she was. So I found out on my own who she was. No one studied with me about who she was. And I found out, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what anybody says about her. I believe she's a prophetess of God. And, and I love her writings, and I stand on that foundation, Bible first, of course. So then when I came back from Brazil, so I was in Brazil for those 5 months, and then Nepal and India for another 9 months, and then I came home, and then I didn't want to work on the Sabbath, and so my employment told me that if I didn't want to work on the Sabbath, I had to be baptized, and so I was baptized on January 23rd of 1999, and I've never looked back since. Yeah, the Lord is good. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I pray that the Lord has touched you with his story. It's his story with one person, and it's his story with each one of us, because we all have a story. He leads each one of us, and we could all spend this time sharing with each other. And I think it's of great value to do that with each other. All right, would you like to end us in prayer?
Let's bow our heads in prayer, brothers and sisters. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that we are here this evening, in this your holy day, in your house of worship. Thank you, O Lord, that we have Dr. Janie here with us, and for taking care of her throughout her travel, and for making way that she can be with us in our church for the next couple of days, within the next few weeks. Lord, as we welcome the Sabbath, we ask that you bless us, O Lord, and be with us and bring us here once again safely tomorrow as we learn more about you. Do forgive us from all our shortcomings and all our sins. All these things we ask in the mighty name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.